Here is a better picture of the truck at the tow yard as I read the transcripts. Okay, the bottom of page 51. I just want to hear what evidence there is, then I could pick up all those issues at that time. All right, so with respect to the 402 hearings, people called Detective Whitten. Mr. Token. Yes, Your Honor. The clerk. You solemnly state that the testimony you're about to give in the cause now depending before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. The witness. I do. The clerk. Thank you. Deputy. Please be seated, sir. Please state your name, spell it for the record. Witness. Daniel Whitten, Daniel The court. Good morning. The witness. Good morning. The court. Mr. Token. Ms. Token. Thank you, Your Honor. Direct examination. Mr. Token. Detective. What is your occupation and assignment? Answer. I am a detective corporal with the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department. How long have you been a police officer? I've been an officer for 14 years. Have you been employed with the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department for 14 years? Yes. And during the course of your employment with the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department, have you had any training with regard to gangs? Yes. Can you describe that training to the court? I received training through basic gang courses as well as advanced gang course. I've also attended 1 or 2 California Gang Investigators Association workshops. Question. In addition to your training with the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department, do you have any other kind of gang-related experience? Answer. I worked 3.5 years in custody in the beginning of my career, where I had many opportunities to talk to gang members who were in custody. I have, in addition to that, investigated gang-related cases since I've been on patrol and as a detective. In your 3.5 years working in custody, can you estimate how many contacts you've had with gang members? Answer. Hundreds. When you had those contacts with gang members, would you speak to them about gang culture? Yes. Would you speak to them about gang hierarchy? Yes. Gang symbols? Yes. Territorials or turfs? Occasionally. Gang affiliations in terms of what they call themselves? Yes. And what about monikers? Yes. Now you indicated that you were on patrol for how many years? 4 years. 4 years, and in your 4 years on patrol, how many contacts did you have with gang members? Probably at least more than 100 as well. Each time you had contact with gang members, did you arrest them? No. Each time you had contact with a gang member, was it as a result of investigating a crime? Not always. Sometimes you would have consensual contact with gang members? Yeah, or they were victims. What were the purposes of those contacts? And not the victim's contacts, but the consensual contacts, where either one victim was subject to a crime. Could be for any reason, but it's always something because gangs are so prevalent. My opportunity and times that I've dealt with talking to them increased my knowledge of goings on. Can you list the names of gangs that you've come in contact with? Yes. Neighborhood Crips out in West Covina as a detective. The 95th Street of Compton Avenue, Crips out of Watts, officially in Los Angeles, Chino Center. We have a small group where they call themselves County Line, Dog Patch out in Ranch Cucamonga. We've dealt with Warskins, Nazi lowriders, P9 in custody and out of custody, Area Brotherhood. There are tons of at least different ones. You know, Grape Street Crips, Denver Lane, the guys out in Pasadena, you know, a whole multitude. Are you affiliated in any way with SMASH unit? I am SMASH certified. What does that mean to be SMASH certified? It's an acronym for Sheriff's Movement Against Street Hoodlums. And with our department, when we do sweeps, sometimes they require that all the officers participate in our SMASH, which generally requires that you have a certain amount of time on and that you've completed the advanced gang course. With regards to gangs that you've made contact with, are that you personally are aware of, you indicated Warskins. NLR, and that stands for Nazi Lowrider. Is that correct? Nazi Lowrider is what they're called, yes. And also Aryan Brotherhood, is that correct? Yeah. In custody, I've dealt with them. Where are you stationed now? Currently, I'm stationed in Yucaipa. Are you aware of any active activities in Yucaipa? I am. How are you aware of the activities? Investigating that I personally participated in, as well as assisting other detectives in patrols briefings for other investigations that are ongoing, and I've passed ones as well. What, if any, gang is currently active in Yucaipa? In the last few months, we have dealt with Westside Verdugo, which is a Hispanic gang, There's Northside Redlands, another Hispanic gang. I always mispronounce it, but Southside Yucaipa Travieso, or something like that. That's another Hispanic gang. I've dealt with white supremacy gangs, cross-family skins, warskins, Brito skins. Recently, I've had contact with at least one NLR guy. We've had information about some P9 guys and independent skins as well. With regards to cross-family skins, have you had contact with any of the members of that gang? I have. Can you estimate how many contacts you've had with members of that gang? I've had 1 to 2 in-person conversations with them, one of which talked to me. I'm aware of a couple others, but I only really talked to 2 of them. What do you mean by talked? Are you talking about debriefing or just casual conversation? While I interviewed one of the people that were involved in this case, I attempted to talk to the other involved in this case. Who were the 2 individuals that were interviewed with regards to this case? I interviewed Joe Johnson and Daniel Waterman. I attempted to talk to him, but he didn't want to talk to me about this case. Who is Joe Johnson? Who is he? In terms of his relationship to cross-family skins, my understanding is that he had, they call it the keys, which is some level of control of the cross-family folks around the Yucaipa Mentone area. What is the terp or area that cross-family skins operates in Yucaipa? Most of the white gangs are not traditionally turf-based gangs in terms of how many Hispanic gangs will claim from this street to that street and this street to that street, north and south. My experience out here and my experience overall is that they're typically much more loosely organized. They're organized around ideology. They're sort of regional a little bit. In talking with other investigators and detectives and looking at contact cards, we've seen cross-family in our high desert, Apple Valley, Hesperia area. We've seen them in our area, Yucaipa, Mentone. I've seen contacts or talked to people who've said they have dealt with them out towards the low desert, Palm Springs directions, then Beaumont into Cal Mesa. My experience is that they do not have distinct territory. It's more of a looser organization based upon ideology. What ideology is that? Their white supremacy. Do they have any traditional revivals? In terms of anyone that they specifically have problems with, I'm not aware of that. The information that I've had is kind of more like specific personal beefs from an ideology standpoint. When you break down their strict ideology, they believe in racial purity, although I found that in reality, that's depending on who you are and what's going on. There seems to be a lot of latitude in terms of who they will deal with. In our area, they do seem to be connected to some of our Hispanic gang members, especially in terms of drugs and moving narcotics and getting and using narcotics. There seems to be some overlap there. Well, you started talking about moving drugs. Are you familiar with gel activity of cross-family skins? In terms of looking at the folks that we've dealt with, there is most of the ones that I've had contact with and most of the ones that I've heard about all use drugs, mostly methamphetamine and heroin. I've seen some cases with arrest for some possession and the kind of stuff. A lot of arrests involving violence. There's some arrests for vehicle theft, evading. There's some documented member in prison who currently in prison for conspiracy and weapon charges. He has a prior arrest for homicide, which I think his conviction ended up being manslaughter of some sort. And who was that? His name is Aaron Welch. You indicated crimes of violence. In addition to what you've already testified about, are there other crimes of violence that cross-family skins engage in? I've seen arrests for robberies. I believe one of the members who is actually incarcerated in Riverside County currently has an open case of assault with a deadly weapon. I think that was an in-custody assault. Do you know who that individual is? Jaron Hopkins. And Jaron Hopkins has some relation to this case, is that correct? Yes, he's associated with one of the involved parties. And who is that? Ricky Johnson as well. I believe he's got more than passing interaction with Joe Johnson and Daniel Waterman. Do you know if they, in addition to ideology, associate themselves with any kind of symbols? A lot of the common sort of racist skinhead symbols, which a lot of the white supremacist groups use a lot of Nazi symbols, is shocking. It tends to kind of put fear into people, so swastikas, quite a few of them have numbers 14 or 88, or both, 1488, which relates back to what they call 14 words and 88 precepts, which is ideology that was written down by a gentleman, well, I use that word loosely, named David Lane, who was one of the founders of a group called The Order. I think he passed away a few years back, but he wrote in the early 80s this stuff. It's sort of this ideology about white supremacy, separatism, so a lot of them will have stuff like that. Hate skulls, a lot of prison tattoos on someone who's white versus someone who's actually expressing those ideologies. A lot of Nazi symbols like Kross family, several of them have actual small crosses on themselves or KF or Kross family. Do they wear any particular clothing or identify themselves with any type of graffiti? I'm not aware of any specific stylized graffiti clothing. I've seen pictures of some of them wearing red, but it's nothing that I would say, I could identify somebody just because they're wearing that color. A lot of skinheads have tendency to wear some of the more traditional boots and red laces, but I haven't had contact specifically with these guys that they wear a uniform like some groups do. Do you know how individuals become members of cross-family skins? I've heard more than one version, but from a couple of street contacts, I've heard that generally it's true. You belong to sort of a subgroup or a fear group called IE Hardcore. Some of that stuff, in talking to other investigators, they say historically that kind of was a group that started off as kind of a punk rock movement, sort of got infiltrated by racist skinheads and sort of morphed into Kross family. I haven't heard anybody who's told me a story from beginning to end that seems to be absolutely set in stone. There are some variations depending on who you talk to. In your opinion, is Kross family skins a criminal street gang? Yes. Now, initially, when you began your investigation in this case, did you begin the investigation with regards to whether this was a gang crime? No. At some point, did your investigation change because you had received information that gang members had been involved? Yes. And when was that? When I first received information about it, the victim was not being cooperative, so I had very limited information, and part of that was a telephone that I recovered that had photos in it. When in those photos, I noticed that there was a person that obviously somebody could identify. I didn't know who it was, but I noticed a tattoo on the wrist that said Pure Hate 1488. When I showed the picture to some of the deputies at the station, and I don't even recall who recognized it, but somebody said, that's Daniel Waterman. I then used the database search, found a picture, and sure enough, it looked like him. Additionally, I wrote a search warrant for the subscriber on that phone that matched. As I started talking to detectives and who his associates were, that's where more of this information came to light, that he and the possibility of Joe Johnson were involved and that they were affiliated with Kross family. Along the way, too, the victim came forward and said he realized that he needed to testify. He mentioned that he thought that some of the people involved were gang members. Is this Ronald Schultz? When you say the victim, yes. Can I talk more in depth about Mr. Schultz told you with regard to his belief that these individuals were gang members? Well, he mentioned that he thought they were gang members. I asked him if he knew more of why that was, and Mr. Schultz is older, in his mid-50s, and so he didn't know and didn't have a gang name or anything like that. But he said based upon the fact that they were referred to by monikers and the tattoos and stuff that he had seen, it was his belief that they were somehow gang affiliated. That was part of his concern, that there was a larger group of people. His concern was for his family. Even if one person was in custody, that didn't mean there wasn't potentially a threat. Question: did Mr. Schultz actually use the word moniker? I don't know whether he said moniker or nickname, but he threw out a couple of names when he was saying it. Do you remember those names that he used? I recall specifically one of the names that he threw out was Whitey. Mr. Paul Harbour. I'm sorry, witness, Whitey. Mr. Token. Initially, Mr. Schultz gave you a statement. Isn't that correct? On the day of the incident, he gave a statement to investigators from Riverside County, and then I spoke to him briefly. I didn't ask for a full statement. I had a couple of specific questions for him. When you say you spoke to him briefly, was that on about November 23rd, 2011? No, the first time I spoke to him was on the day that I was called, so that was September 28th. Question: 28th? Yeah. The next time I spoke to him, I believe, was October 20th. That was when he came forward and gave me a full statement explaining that he had been scared. I spoke to him several more times after that. I'd have to refer to my notes after that day. Question: I'm sorry, it just might be my mistake, but about a month passed between the initial statement that Mr. Schultz gave to the police regarding the crime and then he came forward to you and changed or added to that version of events. Not quite 20-something days. And what was the reason he explained to you for his change in his story? Well, he told me that he realized before the car crash he thought he was probably going to die. He said there had been several incidents which had occurred that he believed were related to these people trying to find his family. Mr. Paul Harper. I'm going to object as to these people as vague. The court. All right. Subject to motion to strike. When you said these people, what did you understand what he has referring to? The suspect that had attacked him and their larger group. Mr. Token. Now, what incidents did he bring to your attention that caused him concern? Well, he related 2 incidents involving his adult daughter. He said that there had been 2 incidents at her work where it caused her to be actually quit her job. The first incident was apparently Mr. Carver's father turning in his EBT card, and it was just a coincidence that she at the time actually worked at the office where that occurred. But she knew Mr. Carver's name, and when she was called to the window to handle a client, that's when she saw the name, and she apparently freaked out. Now, I don't know that was anything going on there, or if that was more of a coincidence, but she was scared. And I'm not clear whether this was before or after, but around the same time. Apparently, she overheard a conversation in her office between 2 women, and they were talking about this incident having happened, and that somebody was somehow friends with Mr. Carver, or friends with Ricky Johnson's family or acquaintances. And with those 2 things happening near each other, she freaked out and quit her job, and then subsequently moved out of state. The court. Are Ricky Johnson and Joe Johnson related? No, they're not legally. They were dating for some time. Yes. Did Mr. Schultz indicate to you what's the significance of the EBT card? I believe Mr. Carver just had one, and his father was returning it to the office because he was then in custody. So I believe that was all innocent, but her perception of it, with everything that happened, causing her to quit her job. And that caused Mr. Schultz to be concerned for his family safety. He said that his family thought they were seeing cars drive by, all kinds of other stuff. I don't have any evidence that there was anything directly going on, but his perception was he was very scared. He told me in the interview that he finally realized that the only way he could really make his family safe was to come forward and tell the truth and cooperate with prosecution. You are familiar with Daniel Waterman? I am. Do you see that individual in the courtroom? I do. Please indicate where the individual is sitting and what he is wearing. He's seated at counsel table wearing a gray suit and eyeglasses. He's right in front of the sign that says phones are not for public use. Court staff only. Mr. Token. Your Honor, may the record reflect the witness has identified the defendant, Mr. Waterman. Court. It will. Mr. Token. Thank you. Mr. Token. Based on your background, training, and experience, it is your opinion that Mr. Waterman is an associate or member of a criminal street gang? Yes. Which is it? He associate or member? He's at least an associate. I've heard from various people that he either just became a member or was about to become a member when this incident happened. Are you familiar with the tattoos? Have you seen any of the tattoos on Mr. Waterman's body? I've seen photographs of them. In addition to the 1488 and pure hate, is that correct? Yes. Does he have any other tattoos that affiliate him with any kind of white supremacist gang? I think I would have to review pictures off the top of my head. I don't recall. And what, if any, gang is he associate or a member of, in your opinion? I've been told that he originally was a member of WARSKINs and that he came over or was coming over to Kross family. Are you familiar with Timothy Carver? I am. Just from the investigation. Do you see that individual in the courtroom today? I do. Can you please indicate where that individual is sitting and what he's wearing? He's seated in a chair behind counsel table. He's wearing a white shirt and a blue geometric pattern tied directly behind. Mr. Myers. I'll stipulate. The court. The record will reflect this witness has identified defendant Carver. Token. Thank you. Do you have any opinion as to whether Mr. Carver is associate or a gang member? I believe he was associating with them. I don't believe he was at that point where they were actually giving him membership into this gang. And for clarification, this gang being Kross Family Skins. Correct. How about Mr. Owen? Are you familiar with him? Yes, I am. Do you see him in the courtroom? Yes. Please indicate where that individual is sitting and what he's wearing. He's seated to Mr. Carver's left wearing a white shirt and a dark tie. He's got long hair, a beard, goatee, and mustache. Record will reflect the witness has identified the defendant. Mr. Token, thank you. Do you have any information about at all with regard to Mr. Owen's gang affiliation or membership? I do not believe he's a member of Kross family. We served a search warrant in his house, and he does have some paraphernalia and images related to outlaw motorcycle gangs. Mr. Ballhart, I'm going to object for lack of discovery. The court overruled at this point. The witness, there was a screensaver and some stickers and stuff that are related to outlaw motorcycle gangs, especially Hell's Angels, but I believe I don't have anything directly affiliating him toward the organization. Mr. Token, in your investigation, the crime that occurred in this case occurred at John Owen's house. Is that correct? Correct. Do you have any opinion as to whether the crime that was committed was in association with or for benefit or promotion of a criminal street gang? I have some uncorroborated information that in the case of Mr. Waterman, motion to strike is non-responsive. The court sustained. Just with regard to your opinion, based on your background, training, and expense, based on your investigation in this case, do you have an opinion as whether the crime that occurred was in furtherance of or for the benefit or promotion of a gang? Yes. And what's that opinion? I believe it was. And what is the basis for that opinion? Based upon people that I've spoken to, their term would be he was putting in work to increase his standing with the gang. Mr. Paul Harper, I'm going to object as to he. The court sustained. Mr. Token, when you say he, who are you referring to? Mr. Waterman. Of course. What about with regard to Mr. Owen and Mr. Carver? I believe Mr. Carver was just along with Mr. Waterman. Mr. Owen, I don't know. I don't believe there's any connection to the portion of it on this part. The court. When you say Mr. Carver was along with Mr. Waterman, what do you mean by that? Based upon my investigation to date, I believe Waterman brought Carver along to educate him in the gang. When you talk about Mr. Owen not being involved, are you referring to the gang stuff or opposed to the actual commission of the crime? Yes. I don't believe that his part had anything to do with him being involved or affiliated with the gang. At the same time, he was associated with individuals who are associated with the gang. Mr. Walhart, I object, leading. The court overruled. The witness, yes. I don't have any further question at this time, Your Honor. Who wants to go first? Does anybody want to go? Mr. Myers, I'm happy to go. We can start. We've got about 10 minutes. I'm sure you're not going to finish. Mr. Gass, can we reserve 5 minutes for an issue that I want to address for the record? Yeah, I have an issue. Do you want to just raise these issues before anyone starts cross-examination? We'll do whatever you want to do. Mr. Myers, well, I have to request to continue the trial, and it's part of what I'm hearing, which is all mostly new information. It's partly materials that were just handed to me before we started this 402. It's materials that I don't have. So that's where I'm going, and that's what I want to do before the noon hour. Okay. Well, what I'd like to do is at least flush out the information that we can. Finish this hearing, and then we'll see where you are as far as if there's follow-up that needs to be done. I can consider or entertain a continuous request at the point or get all the information. I may rule that some of it is not admissible, which may negate the need for a continuance. Mr. Myers, no, I understand some of this goes beyond the norm. Some of the material that I don't have, that I was just handed, really doesn't relate to this 402 hearing. The court, Mr. Gass, same type of issue. Mr. Gass, yes. The court, okay, why don't we finish this and I'll make my ruling and then we'll see what we can do. Mr. Myers, good morning, Detective, good morning. In response to court's question regarding Mr. Carver, that it's your opinion that Mr. Waterman brought Mr. Carver with him to educate him about the gang. Is that your opinion? Yes, yes. And what is that based on? What facts do you have to support that opinion? During one of Mr. Carver's jail calls to Ricky Johnson, he tells her Daniel introduced him to someone that evening as his comrade or Kross family. Mr. Myers, okay, right, Your Honor. This is what I'm talking about because I was just handed jail calls an hour ago. And I don't fault the prosecutor at all, but this is a continuing problem. Since I continued this case in May, I can't adequately represent my client and cross-examine this issue when I don't have the materials. The court, no, and I understand that's a reason we've had several continuances anyway, in addition to counsel conflicting. Does anybody have copies of the jail calls? Mr. Token, Your Honor, if I could make a record, I received the jail calls this morning from Detective Whitten in a discussion with him about phone calls. I thought we were talking about the Miranda issue, and then he brought those forward. The court, and I guess it depends when the phone calls were made. If the phone calls were made 2 days ago, Mr. Myers, no, that's a fair inquiry, but these were done on the day of my client's arrest and the following 9 days, so September 28th and October 26th. The court, why don't we, well, we're going to break anyway because the court has a family emergency to attend to. I don't know, maybe those phone calls aren't that long. Maybe we could listen to them this afternoon. We'll come back tomorrow at 10. I'll excuse the jury at 10 tomorrow, and we could request whatever discovery issues there are, if it's necessary, to get a continuance based on that. We'll figure it out. But see if you could listen to what you have and then enlighten me tomorrow. Mr. Myers, will do. The court hearing is continued until tomorrow, so we'll have you back at 10 tomorrow. Thank you, sir. Right away, as you can tell.